Welcome to The American Story. Stories about what it is that makes America beautiful. Heartbreaking, funny, inspiring, and endlessly interesting. This is Chris Flannery with the Claremont Institute. I call this one Miracle on Ice. It is somehow always the best of times and the worst of times. But the winter of 1980 in America felt like it had more than its share of the worst. Unemployment was high. Inflation was raging. People were grateful to get a home loan with an interest rate under 12%. A continuing energy crisis produced gas rationing and long, anxious lines of cars at gas stations across the country. And there was something that ran deeper than inflation, unemployment, or energy shortages. The nation seemed to be living out the moral and spiritual crisis President Jimmy Carter had spoken of months earlier in a depressing nationally televised speech that became known as the Malaise Speech. After canceling a scheduled 4th of July speech, the president had mysteriously disappeared for 10 days, stirring rumors that he was ill or had left the country. He had actually gone on a 10-day personal survey of the American people, and he returned to report on his findings. It wasn't pretty. Carter concluded that all the legislation in the world can't fix what's wrong with America. We were suffering a crisis of confidence, with growing doubt about the meaning of our own lives and a loss of a unity of purpose in the nation. And that was just the domestic scene. In the dangerous world beyond our shores, America was reeling. Iran had seized the American embassy in Tehran and was holding 50 Americans hostage. The Soviet Union seemed to be winning the Cold War that had been going on for a generation. They had made themselves what appeared to be the greatest military power on Earth, deploying dangerous new nuclear missiles in Europe and advancing across the world, while America retreated. To protest the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan, President Carter declared that the United States would boycott the 1980 Summer Olympics in Moscow. The great Los Angeles Times sports columnist Jim Murray captured the moral caliber of the declaration. In response to crises like the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan, he observed, most nations mobilized their Army, Navy, and Air Force. The United States demobilized its 400-meter relay team. But the United States would compete in the Winter Olympics in Lake Placid, New York. And there they would find a Soviet ice hockey team that seemed as unstoppable as the Red Army. They had won 4 straight Olympics and had not lost an Olympic hockey game since 1968. Their key players were thought to be the best in the world. They were de facto professionals with long histories of international play. The American team were mostly current and former college kids, with an average age of 22. An exhibition game at Madison Square Garden just before the Olympics had what seemed a fated result. The Soviets barely broke a sweat and crushed the Americans 10-3. Even to play the Soviets for real in the Olympics, the United States would first have to make their way through several other teams, which they didn't look at all likely to do. They seemed to have lost their first game on February 12th against Sweden, when a minor miracle tied the game with 27 seconds to play. Then 2 days later came a surprisingly dominant victory over Czechoslovakia, one of the strongest teams. 2 days after that, they beat Norway. Then they toppled Romania. Then they came from behind against West Germany to advance implausibly to meet the Soviets on February 22nd in the medal round. The stands were packed. The home crowd waved U.S. flags. Before the game, the American coach read his players a statement he had written out that became legendary, telling them, "You were born to be a player. You were meant to be here. This moment is yours." What followed was 3 periods of thrilling back and forth, with shots, plays, tactics, and decisions that American hockey fans of a certain age can still replay in their minds. In the end, the Americans came from behind again and held on desperately to a 1-point lead for 10 heart-stopping minutes, until with the clock running out, the wild crowd began a countdown. The young Al Michaels was announcing the game. He was then a relatively unknown broadcaster who got the assignment because he had called one hockey game before, and no one else on the staff had ever called any. He picked up the countdown and began what is to this day known as the greatest call in the history of American broadcasting. Concluding with the defining question, do you believe in miracles? And the answer, yes. Team USA had done the impossible. In the American team's locker room afterwards, the players spontaneously broke into a chorus of God Bless America. As the crowd filtered out into the night, the Star-Spangled Banner could be heard in Lake Placid bars and restaurants. The moment was so historic and conclusive that most of the American public assumed that was it, a gold medal triumph. But no, Team USA could still end up with no medal at all. They still had to beat Finland, a very tough squad, which of course they went on to do, as usual coming from behind in the final period. As the team celebrated on the ice after that final game, someone threw a huge American flag around heroic goalie Jim Craig. After hugging his teammates, he skated around the arena, looking out into the stands and calling, "Where's my father?" He found his dad finally, and watching them embrace, the whole country felt like part of the family. It's a lot to ask of a bunch of kids on one hockey team, but suddenly we all felt like we could come from behind, even against the most powerful forces in the world. We could do the impossible. We could believe in miracles, in our future, and most importantly, in ourselves. Thanks for being part of the American Story. This is Chris Flannery with the Claremont Institute. The American Story podcast is made possible through listener donations. If you'd like to support the production of more stories, please visit theamericanstorypodcast.org and click Donate. By visiting theamericanstorypodcast.org, you'll also find that each episode has resources for you to explore. That's theamericanstorypodcast.org.